Another question that I get a lot is obviously things like ankle mobility are so important for basketball players to make these moves that Allen Iverson's making. If you pause it at the right time, you see just how forward his shin is. Mm-hmm. And it's the Kobe, same thing, just insane ankle mobility. Do you believe that this is something that's mainly genetic? It's like this is just how your ankle structure is built? Or do you feel like this is something we can significantly improve? If we can significantly improve it, do you do it through these traditional ankle mobility drills, or do we just load it through strength training in a full range?
I think
that's a loaded question.
It's a great question, though. I think it's multifactorial in the sense that it depends. The biggest factor, I think, if you're going to change any sort of flexibility, it's how old are you? I think that's the number one thing to think about, because if you've got an 80-year-old grandpa, good luck getting him to really change his movement and flexibility. If you're younger, though, then I think that you are still very nimble and your tissues have not, for lack of a better term, solidified into the state that through puberty, that process is ongoing. And then beyond puberty, you can make the argument that you are now in a degree of like really the myelination process has finished, and you're in this position now where you can probably get more flexible, but less so than if you were younger and still going through the process of developing and solidifying what your joints and tissues are capable of. And then we can layer genetics on top of that. So I think genetics, nothing you can do about it. But if when you're younger, you're exposing yourself constantly to different stresses, different positions, and just getting a lot of different movement happening. If you're playing, I think that's just what it is. If you're playing, then I think that's going to allow you to access those high levels of mobility. So I think that's why you see these basketball players with crazy amounts of mobility, ankle mobility. So they were probably doing that for a long time when they were young and through puberty. But if we do want to actually make a change, I think it's important to respect what's actually happening at the pelvis and at the foot. I'm kind of like a broken record here, but I think that's kind of like what we need to start to think about.
Which, when you're a broken record, that thing probably matters. The thing you keep going back to, it just matters that much that everything comes back to that.
Exactly. Let's relate the pelvis to the foot again. So let's say we got that forward pelvis, and then that foot is constantly having more weight pushed forward on it. So imagine that you now tried to push your knee over your toe. And when you do a calf raise, for example, when you're on your forefoot and you try to basically push into the ground and stand on your tiptoes, that is plantar flexion. That is that joint action of your calf working, and then you go up. The opposite of dorsiflexion, which is what most people think of as ankle mobility, where the knee goes over the toe and the heel is flat on the floor. That right there needs to happen with the calf in an elongated position. But if you're constantly on your forefoot and your calves are constantly on in this shortened state, then how much success are you going to have constantly trying to stretch your way into better ankle mobility when you can't even get on your back foot because of the position of your pelvis? That's a consideration a lot of people don't think about a lot.
Which is common. I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, and actually our last guest is a podiatrist, and he's like, we see tight calves over and over and over again, and they stretch the calves all day. They do all this ankle mobility stuff, and their calves are still tight. And it probably goes back to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're only looking at the foot in isolation, then I think you're leaving a lot on the table for what you could do, because these things are so interconnected, you can't separate one from the other. And I think it's just a matter of people understanding these things, because once they're educated, they see, oh, okay, now if I actually get my pelvis to come back, then I can actually now access more ankle mobility. And that's something that can be said for any structure within the body. If you're trying to improve your shoulder mobility, maybe you need to think about what your pelvis is doing in that. Maybe if you're trying to improve, I don't know, your hip mobility, maybe you need to think about other structures influencing that as well. So it's all about understanding and appreciating that things are connected and you can't separate one from the other, because we have fascia, we have all these different tissues. Like literally, if I were to take out a cadaver or just any sort of like tissue within the body, you could not make a conscious separation in your mind of what these tissues are, because they're so connected through fascia and this hard tissue that is basically a layer on top of the muscle. So I've seen a lot of different muscles that were dissected, and they're literally just sheets. Like with the fascia on top of them, there's no chance you could differentiate the muscles from one another until you get that fascia off of there.
Yeah.
And then you can start to make those other differentiations. Oh, this is this muscle, this is that muscle. But literally from your foot all the way up to your shoulder, these fascial lines run.
Right.
And that's why you can't separate them.
Right. That's awesome.